4, 3, 2, 1, and you're live.
Good evening, everyone. Hope everyone's having a pleasant evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for an online discussion. We value these opportunities to hear directly from the public and the people we serve and to talk about fish and wildlife conservation in our state. I see that people are still joining us, so we'll get started momentarily, just a few minutes here. And I wanted to let you know that I'm joined tonight by our Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife Director, Kelly Susewind. Thanks for being here, Kelly.
You bet. Thank you, Brendan. Very excited to be here tonight, even if it is just digitally. I will be even more excited to get out in the region and when we can actually resume the in-person, face-to-face communications. So much more helpful. But in the meantime, we're all dealing with the world that's been turned upside down by COVID, so this is our best opportunity. It's a great chance for us to do just what you described, connect directly with our public, understand the issues for you, and then tell you a little bit about what's going on with us. So my main thing would be thanks everybody for joining us tonight. We know this new chaotic world, everybody's really busy, and we really appreciate your cutting out enough time to visit us either here tonight live or for the recording. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Brendan. I see we still got some folks coming on.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate it. Thanks again, everyone, for coming. Yeah, and as Kelly said, it's great you could join us and make time for us and try and meet with us. So, before we jump into the presentation, we've got a few housekeeping items to go over. We want this online event to be for you, so we're here to answer your questions. And that's why we're committing most of the time tonight to questions and answer, and the presentation will be relatively short. At any time, you can type your question or comment into the Q&A chat feature on your screen, should be on the right side of your screen. We'll answer as many questions as we can get to. And if we run out of time and don't get to your question, you can email us at director@dfw.wa.gov. so that we can follow up with you. And that email address should be in the chat too. To get us started, Director Kelly Susewind and I are gonna let you know about some of the work going on in this area and in the department in general. We'll give you an update on some statewide issues, and we'll provide information on the southern resident killer whale recovery, habitat restoration, and managing invasive European green crabs. And lastly, we are recording this event, and it will post online afterwards for those unable to attend. So maybe now is a good time to tell you a little bit more about myself. I've only been the regional director for about a year now, so I'm losing my ability to use the new guy excuse. Have worked most of my time exclusively in the North Puget Sound region as part of our habitat program, and I've been with the department since 2001. I enjoy hunting and fishing, skiing, climbing, and mountain biking. And I'd just like to point out that all of those can be done in our beautiful North Puget Sound backyard. So let's start on in presentation, and we'll start with some general information about WDFW in the regions. Our department is organized into 6 regions, and the North Puget Sound region is the one you are hopefully watching us from, but you could be watching from another region, but that's what we're here to talk about tonight. Many of you know it as Region 4, we call it North Puget Sound, and it includes Island King, Skagit, Snohomish, Whatcom, and San Juan counties, so 6 counties. Our headquarters are located in Mill Creek, and we have field offices in North Bend, Bellingham, and LaConner. You can always please just feel free to reach out to our customer service staff. They're just fantastic folks, easy to talk to, can answer, well, certainly more questions than I can. They can be reached via email or phone, and the number and email is on the screen right there. Yeah, now I think I'll pass it off to Director Susewind for a couple of updates.
Thanks, Brendan. So we've been going around the state doing these open houses for a while now, and usually the questions that come to me directly are around budget. So I thought I'd just go ahead and start off talking about some budget items. We have in our budget request this year going to the legislature a about an $8 million backfill for some short federal funds. I won't get into those too much. I will say it's an interesting budget time with our COVID experience. We came off our best legislative session relative to budget last year that we've ever had. We have been struggling for about a decade with our budget ever since the Great Recession, and we were still at recession levels with many aspects of our budget. A lot of hard work from many of our constituents out there that are joining us, I hope, tonight. Consolidated effort at the legislature, great response, fixed some of our structural items that were causing us problems. So it was all great news. Final conference budget was about March 6th, I think. And that same week was the first week that the next week was when we started sending people home for COVID. So the celebration was short-lived. We'd managed to fix a few things, but then we have a state facing a pretty major budget hole as a result of COVID. So we're going in with a pretty modest ask this year. There's a lot of things we would like to be working on, but we want to be respectful of the legislator's task to solve an overall budget problem. So for new expanding areas of what we call policy investments, we're asking for $17 million this year from the legislature. I'll break those down into a number of groups. I won't get into a lot of detail, can answer questions later. Everybody wants to hear about budget till you start talking about budget, and then it gets pretty boring pretty quick. So I will try to make short of it. We have about $2.5 million going to landowners, landowner assistance. Basically, we had some changes in our hydraulic project approval last year. This is an effort to put bodies on the ground to help provide technical assistance for folks that are doing projects that could affect fish life. We found that the best way to get compliance is get our folks out there in a technical assistance role. Most people are willing to do the right thing if you just can help them understand what that is. So we've got a $2.5 million ask for that. We've got $2.8 million for dealing with aquatic invasive species. This is early detection, rapid response. We're talking primarily about zebra and quagga mussels, European green crab, and northern pike, which is becoming a pretty scary situation in the Columbia. We also have about $4.3 million to fulfill agreements that we have with tribal members, our co-managers. That's basically through our North of Falcon efforts. North of Falcon is where we set seasons normally, and a couple of years ago, it was noticed that, we really talk about harvest only there. We need to be talking about habitat. So we're putting together a habitat type plan with our co-managers, recognizing the best way to provide some relief from some of the constraints on our fishing is to actually get more fish in those rivers, so we have a little more flexibility. So we've got $4.3 million going to that. That'll do some baseline monitoring. It'll also do some on-the-ground work, primarily in the Stillaguamish. We have about $2.7 million for marine mammal management. So this is an effort around primarily seals and sea lions. There's a little bit in there for figuring out how well we're doing with the southern resident killer whale viewing regulations that hopefully will come up a little later tonight, out for public comment right now, or about to go back to the commission. So this would be efforts, one, to remove sea lions primarily on the Columbia, and then some work in Puget Sound around seals, dealing with population metrics and also diet metrics. All these, the marine mammals are in the Marine Mammal Protection Act. It's a very stringent act, and you really need to have your homework done and your foundation built if you're going to be able to do any kind of management. We're making sure we have that done in Puget Sound, and also figure out just what that management might look like. We have about $2.5 million for fisheries management. This includes some monitoring on the coast for whale entanglements. As food sources have shifted around, the whales are changing kind of where they're feeding, and they're getting hung up in crab pots along the entire west coast. So some effort to minimize the entanglements there for gray and humpback whales. Also some monitoring in the sound for zooplankton. It's a basis for our healthy sound ecosystems. And then also some monitoring just on basically fish returns and so we know what we're doing, if what we're doing is working or not, and we can provide the better information we have, the more precisely we can do management, both in recovery and in harvest. We have a small package of about $700,000 to, it's called our Evergreen Jobs. Some of this will be passed through grants for individuals to improve habitat. There will be basically habitat in schoolyards effort, where we can build that habitat in schoolyards, have it be an educational opportunity, and have that work done by the Washington Conservation Corps. So as we go into the tough economic time, jobs are critical, and this will create some of those entry-level jobs for folks that hopefully will get hooked and have a career in natural resources. And then we have a little bit of money, $300,000 asked for wildlife rehabilitators. This is not new money. This is just an ability to spend some money that's sitting in an account and an area that we desperately need to make sure we're focusing on. So that's I apologize for the barrage of budget in that that short time frame, but we always get to ask the question. So that's a superficial level at it, and again, we could ask or answer more questions later. While I've got the mic here for just a minute, I want to talk about something that's a little more fun than budget. At least I think it is, and that's some wildlife themed lesson plans we've developed for elementary, middle, and high schools. So with the ongoing pandemic, educators and students are learning how to have a new education experience. We thought this was a great opportunity, one, to pitch in and just provide some curriculum, but also make sure that we've got our youngsters connected with wildlife and being educated so that we have a better knowledgeable group as they come out of school. So some great opportunities there. I think we're going to put a link in the chat if you want to take a look. Really fun stuff. One of the recent ones was on bats, and I got a ton of positive feedback on that. So that's another thing that I just thought I'd bring you up to speed on as we get started tonight. But I've already talked longer than I intended to, so I'm going to kick it back to Brendan to talk about some topics that are specific focus for this region.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate it. Thanks for the overview. That was great. So now let's turn our focus to some of these North Puget Sound region topics. And I think what we'll do is start off with southern resident killer whales and orca recovery. So whether it's restoring habitat, helping boaters give orcas extra space, or supporting more hatchery fish to provide food for these iconic animals, our department is hard at work to help the southern resident killer whale recovery. We have Wdfw enforcement officers out there on the water educating boaters how they can recreate responsibly to keep the orcas and people safe. And as you'll see posted in the chat, there should be the infographic around the new killer whale viewing regulations that were signed into law last year. So this new law states that you must stay at least 300 yards away from the killer whales, and you have to remain at least 400 yards out of their path or behind them. Also require that vessels do not exceed 7 knots when they're within a half nautical mile of the whales. We're in the process of developing some updated rules for the commercial whale watching. In fact, as Kelly mentioned, right now there's a public comment period on the draft rules. It continues through tomorrow, November 13th. And if you can't get your comments in, don't worry. The commission, Fish and Wildlife Commission, will be taking public comments at the hearing, which is December 4th through 5th. And then there should be, I think we're going to also post more information on how to get involved in the chat. So in connection with efforts to restore habitat, we're working to help support a healthy diet for southern resident killer whales, which rely primarily on Chinook salmon. We are producing millions of additional Chinook smolts, which are young salmon, annually at fish hatcheries around Western Washington. So we also set commercial and recreational salmon fishing seasons in a way that takes into account the needs of the southern resident killer whales and minimizes how often fishing boats and southern resident killer whales will cross paths. And then finally, we've been a partner in the West Coast Marine Mammal Stranding Network since its origin, all the way back into the early 1980s. And so alongside our research partners, we determine the causes of death, track new and existing diseases and parasites, monitor toxins and contaminants in marine mammals. We also help in responding when large marine mammals get entangled or affected by an oil spill. Kelly, anything you like to add to that, or?
Well, I think you did a great job there, Brendan, summing it up. I would just say that, this is a critical element of our work. Obviously, this is an icon for the Pacific Northwest. It's also an indicator of how our wildlife are doing generally, our habitat and our ecosystems are doing. So critical work. We've put a ton of energy into it, but we've got even more energy coming from our partners. So I, again, like to thank our partners for that. NGOs, other state agencies, as well as the governor's office is obviously a big player with the Southern Resident Killer Whale Task Force. So thank you to our partners. And then also just, I guess I will be the kind of the Vanna White pointing to the chat frequently here. We'll put up a link for those of you that might want to take action that you as an individual might be able to take with helping us with Southern Resident Killer Whales. And we have a link to that on our website. So I will stop with that and let you go on to your next slide that's up. Thanks, Brendan.
All right, great. Thank you, Kelly. So now we'll talk about habitat restoration, which is one of my favorite topics. It's incredibly important, not just for the recovery of the Southern Resident Killer Whale, but for recovering endangered salmon, shellfish, forage fish, other species in Puget Sound. So we're proud to lead the Estuarine Salmon Restoration Program, or ESRP, and we collaborate with local communities and provide funding and technical assistance to organizations working to restore the shoreline and nearshore habitats. Every 2 years, ESRP creates a Puget Sound-wide prioritized list of projects, and then you can check out that list. I think we're putting that in the chat also. To fund this list of projects, ESRP is requesting $20 million from the state legislature for projects all across Puget Sound. Maybe talk about some of the examples. So some recent examples of habitat restoration projects that we've completed include Fur Island Farm Reserve, which is 131 acres of estuary habitat now restored as of, I believe it was 2016. And the photos on this slide that you see are the before and after of the estuary. So that tidally influenced area you see there hadn't seen water in almost 100 years. So another recent project is Liqui Island. That's a unit of our Skagit Wildlife Area, where we completed a habitat restoration project last year that restored 250 acres of tidal marsh habitat in the Stillaguamish River estuary. We're also considering a new habitat restoration project on the island unit of the Skagit Wildlife Area, and we will assess several options based on the community values, salmon recovery goals, waterfowl hunting and conservation, and other criteria. So we're in the alternatives analysis phase for that, and we've got a stakeholder advisory group that's doing some fantastic work. I'd like to shout out to them thank you for that work. And it's a priority area to restore because it's historically a tidally influenced estuary that provides that critical rearing habitat for juvenile Chinook. The public comment period to provide feedback on the habitat restoration project options, which range from no restoration at all to restoration of the entire 268 acre site, begins later this month. The project options will be on our website starting Monday. That's November 16th. And the public comment period will be open from the 16th through December 16th. So there'll be a month of open public comment. You can also mark your calendars for an online public meeting on December 2nd from 6 to 8 p.m., where you can provide your comments on the habitat restoration options for the island unit. Kelly, anything you'd like to add?
Thanks, Brendan. I think, again, great job on that. I'll just say that these are great examples of our conservation and habitat restoration efforts. This is a big focus for our agency. We're generally always known as the hunting and fishing agency, and we certainly are that and want to continue being that and doing a good job of it. We also want to get known better as a conservation agency. That's the real key to all this. Unless we have healthy habitat, connected habitat, and resilient habitat, we're just really not going to have the opportunity to provide those opportunities. So this is a priority, a direction for the agency. Another way to take a look at this and understand what we're doing or see what we're doing is to take a look at our strategic plan. The commission just adopted it very recently. I'd forgotten the date, but it directs the agency on where we're going to go for the next 25 years, and it has an emphasis on that conservation and restoration element. So I think that's all I would add on that one. Thanks, Brendan.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate it. So one of the major threats we mentioned earlier, the European green crab. Invasive species in general are one of the greatest threats to the well-being of our natural resources. And one of them in particular is that European green crab. Kelly mentioned the zebra and quagga mussels. Those are also incredibly invasive and really a threat to our natural resources and ecosystems. Green crab, they pose a threat to our shellfish, our native shellfish, specifically the younger age classes, which are important for tribal, recreational, and commercial harvest, as well as to the shellfish aquaculture industry, which is prevalent in Puget Sound. We have a big shellfish aquaculture industry in North Puget Sound. They're also a threat to native estuary populations. The European green crab was first discovered in Washington in Willapa Bay back in 1998 and Gray Harbor. But since 2016, they've been detected in a lot of other sites around the Salish Sea, and including Padilla Bay, Squim Bay, Dungeness Spit, Lumi Bay, Drayton Harbor, and the San Juan Islands. So they are apparently spreading and pretty rapidly. We've got really high numbers from our trapping efforts, and it is a threat. So we've established a partnership with the Washington Sea Grant and launched a crab team in 2015 that engages hundreds of community science volunteers, literally, local, state, and federal agencies, nonprofit organizations, and 10 Salish Sea tribes. To limit the invasion of these green crabs, we're focusing much of our efforts on the early detection by monitoring locations that offer a good habitat for that species. If green crabs are detected at a new location, we conduct rapid response actions to try and trap those populations and encourage you to report them. And I think we're going to put something in the chat around how do you actually do that? How do you report those crab and learn to identify them properly? We don't want folks keeping them just because a lot of native species could be mistaken for these crabs. So they need to be clearly identified, and then we need to set out the trapping teams right away. The Drayton Harbor area in Blaine remains one of the regional hotspots. And this year we've got about 10 crab for every 100 traps set. And that's a lot of catch per unit effort. So that's a pretty high count. Another regional hotspot is Lumi Bay, where hundreds of green crabs have been trapped this year, and we're working with the Lumi Nation to slow the invasion there by intensive trapping efforts as well. So if you want to help with these, you might be wondering right now, how can I help? The easiest way is to keep your eyes open for them every time you visit the beach. I believe there was a method on how to identify them put in the chat. And then when you do, please report them, and then we'll send out folks to help trap it. And the most distinctive feature is actually, even though it's called the European green crab, is not the color. So it's identified mostly by the 5 spines or marginal teeth on the outside of the carapace, which is the back shell of the crab. And, you know, again, please, if you find them, report them, because it's really a big concern to all. And I think, you know, finished up on the European green crab. Anything you'd like to add to that, Kelly?
Not really an ad, but I just reemphasize your last point. I think the best thing folks can do to really help us get our arms around this is be attentive, watch for the crabs, learn how to identify them, and if you see them, let us know so we can work with our partners on getting those rapid responses out there, get traps set, and do our best to keep these things from spreading. So that's the most important thing and helpful thing you can do. So I think you touched on it pretty well, Brendan.
All right. And that, I guess that wraps up our short presentation. So now we're pretty excited to be able to actually answer questions and open it up. And as a reminder, just place your questions in the chat box and they will come up to us. Okay, and they're coming up now. How are we supporting the warm? This looks like it's a question for me. How are we supporting the warm water fisheries and fishermen? Well, we're doing as much as we can to support those warm water fisheries. We've got an inland warm water fish program, and we're out trying to do some assessment. I know right now we're working on moving black crappie to different lakes to help try and increase that black crappie fishery. I believe it's Silver Lake, and we are trying to trap and relocate these fish. It's the middle of winter is a good time. They end up in a specific place where we can go and net them and trap them, and then we're relocating to other lakes to help support that fishery just as one. And then let's see. Here's one for myself and you, Kelly. What is the status of the Region 4 hatchery cuts associated with budget adjustments? What will be the impacts on trout and steelhead fishing?
Want me to take a first shot at that, Brendan?
Sure, that'd be great.
And the reason I want to do this is I didn't really go over a reduction package that we had put forward earlier this year. That was an exercise directed by OFM at a time when we felt like the state was facing about a $9 billion shortfall over the next 3 years. Shortly after that, conditions improved. I hate to say improved because it's only a $4.5 billion shortfall. It's still a major shortfall to deal with. But that list of cuts was not our proposed. It's not what we're forwarding to the legislature as a proposal. It's a fallback if we end up getting pushed for cuts. So what's the status of it? The status of our cuts throughout the state, I think it had about 12 hatcheries in total, is just that. It's it's on a list. It's a potential. And our job now is to convince the legislature that while we're trying to balance the budget for the state, this is a bad place to do it. It's a great return on investment, financially, economically, our hatcheries, as well as we're seeing an increased demand for our services statewide. We are an outlet during the time of COVID. So we're going to be making a hard push with our partners that helped us have such a successful session last year to convince folks that we don't need to take those cuts. So right now, I just want to emphasize, I get a lot, why are you cutting X? And it usually ends up being something on that list that we're not planning to cut. It's just on a list of potentials. And our job now is to do the best we can to limit how many of those cuts, if any of those cuts, we have to take. So a little bit of a roundabout one, but I just want to put things in context.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate it. Okay, next question. Regarding hatchery production of Chinook for Orca, what's the state of the science on Orca feeding on hatchery Chinook? I've heard from multiple sources this would not be helpful to Orca. Is this incorrect? And I guess I can take a stab at that one, Kelly, and you can follow up. I would say yes, that is incorrect. The hatchery Chinook are helpful to the Orca, just as wild Chinook are. Those Chinook are only in the river, or only in the hatchery for a very limited part of its life, and it matures and grows into the adult Chinook out in the wild, just like a wild natural origin born Chinook does as well. So the food value is about the same there, and that I think that is a misconception that folks have about hatchery Chinook. They will definitely help the Orca. Okay. This one's for you, Kelly, it looks like. Please provide info on the budget request for WDFW enforcement, RE Southern Resident Killer Whales.
So our budget request is around Southern residents, primarily is around monitoring the effectiveness of the new regulations. On that cut list I talked about were enforcement elements as well. So we're proceeding ahead with the increases we had from the legislature before, with those patrols enforcing those regulations. So we'll try to make sure, I'll ask staff to make sure we put a link in there. We have links to the basically talking points for each of our budget items, and we can send you to that for a lot better detail.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. It looks like the next one's for you as well. You spoke of killing pinnipeds to reduce their consumption of salmon. Why don't you address the real problem affecting the salmon recovery, the 4 lower Snake River dams?
All right, that's a loaded question. So I want to emphasize first, yes, I did talk about removing pinnipeds. That was the result of a change in the Marine Mammal Protection Act. I mentioned that only because it's recent, it's current, and it's in our budget request. It's certainly not our only element. So on the Columbia, we're looking at, just like we do everywhere, our 4-H's. We look at habitat, hatcheries, harvest, and the hydros on the Columbia River. All are elements of that. Certainly the Snake River dams have an impact. They also have a social importance through the economics and clean power for the region. Bottom line for me personally is I think the right venue for that is a broader discussion around removal of dams, and frankly, we need to be taking action sooner than that to help our southern resident killer whales. Again, it's not just pinniped reduction, but we've got studies that show some runs could be impacted by as much as 40% of the returning adults are being eaten by pinnipeds at the dams. And so you put a lot of energy into getting those fish out there, getting them back. We've created an unnatural situation where those pinnipeds, those sea lions are eating those fish. And it's critical that we not let them become habituated to that and impact our runs. And so that's why we're doing that. And again, it's certainly not the only thing. It's an element, but it's not the only or the most important element.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Kelly. Looks like the next one's for you too. What is Wdfw's position in supporting education in the K through 12 and community for salmon recovery?
I'm not quite sure I follow it, but we're working out. We're working on that curriculum I talked about. We're reaching out. We're, as part of the strategic plan, we talked about connecting with communities and schools. So we're trying to get our staff out there in schools when we have schools. So this whole, as we mentioned before, the world's kind of a unique place right now. So that's how we're trying to engage with K through 12. And we're doing it through a number of avenues, not just for salmon recovery, but for habitat as well, and for just that great connection to the outdoors. So I hope that answers your question. If not, I'll remind folks at this point too that if you have a question you didn't feel was answered in a way that you weren't intending, or a question you think about later, just send us an email. We are recording these, and we will process through the emails and make sure you get questions, or excuse me, answers to your questions.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. So another one for you. You're on a roll here. Is the $20 million you referenced for this biennium, and do you have a plan to budget and score out future salmon restoration? Does this include culverts for cities and counties?
So yeah, yes, definitely. I mean, right now we're looking at our current budgets, but these are starting points for if we're really going to recover salmon. These are all just starting points. I hope most folks know that we have a injunction that drives the state culverts, but certainly county and city culverts are a big problem. There are also a lot of dollars for communities that are already struggling. So we are working on that. We have a process for prioritizing our culvert replacement so that we make sure we get the biggest bang for the buck and get the most important ones first. And yes, we'll be continuing with that effort. Hopefully we can get some investment in these tough economic times. It's going to take a lot of money. We have a fraction of what we need to recover salmon in the Pacific Northwest.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. Okay, so next one's for me, for Brendan. These habitat restoration projects are great. However, could you comment on why there's very little improvement in these areas, and in some cases continue to see decreases in stocks? And I think there's a number of reasons for that. One of which is the population of Puget Sound continues to grow and increase at a rate that is really rapid. So we're seeing habitat impacts increasing at a greater rate than we can recover habitat. Habitat restoration projects take a lot of time to complete, and they're very complex. Another reason is as we see ocean conditions worsen. So for instance, we've had the blob has occurred in the last couple of few years, and then we'll have a couple of years where ocean conditions are good, and then fish returns will be higher. So there is a fluctuation there on stocks that has a lot to do with the ocean conditions as well as the habitat that they are returning to and being born from. So it's a complicated project. Process. We need to keep at it and try and increase the rate of habitat restoration as best we can. Okay, another question from me. What does this waterfowl season look like this year? And our biologists are indicating the waterfowl season is looking really good. So we've got a lot of birds coming down. These cold storms that we're getting right now will be pushing them in. Really active, especially at the Snoqualmie Wildlife Area. We've had some really good hunts out there. We've got I want to say it's 70 properties around Region 4 that are open for our quality hunt program that feel free to hunt by reservation or hunt by register to hunt. Local biologists say there's plenty of action to come, and then our numbers are looking good for the return of snow geese again. So we're looking like we're going to have a lot of snow geese returning, and under the dabbling ducks as well. Okay, let's see. Here's one for you, Kelly. How has COVID-19 affected the department's work? Will there be closures of hunting fishing seasons if there's a spike in cases this winter?
Well, it's affected our work, and we could probably talk for hours just on that, just like every citizen out there has had their lives impacted by COVID. Big challenges for us are closures of hunting and fishing seasons. Turns out even bigger challenges are getting those seasons reopened. A lot of work in doing that. We've got a staff still mandatory teleworking if they can. We've got a lot of folks that, our jobs aren't conducive to a desk job or teleworking. They are out in the field doing the work, so we've had to develop new protocols and processes to make sure our staff are protected while they're out there doing their work to support our fish and wildlife. Specifically on the question, will there be closures if we see spikes? It's a case-by-case decision. We made some pretty broad brush decisions when we were first learning how to deal with stuff. I think those were the right decisions for that time. We're being very careful and methodical and working with local health organizations, health officers, and elected officials as we contemplate opening or closing. It's a last resort for us. We really don't want to close down those activities. They provide that outlet that I discussed earlier. But in the end, if it creates a situation where we're going to increase the risk to our citizens, we would potentially close. So the things we look at are what's the case rate in a given area. We don't want to send people into an area, create a nuisance basically by attracting people to an area with a high rate. We also don't want to drive people from a high area to areas that are not impacted. So, but we're working with it well. I mean, a temporary success story for us is not specific to Region 4, it's more Region 6. But the razor clams were one of the first things we closed down. We struggled to get them open last spring, had great cooperation, weekly meetings with our local elected officials and health officials on the coast, got those seasons back open. Unfortunately, then we're hit by domoic acid and we're shut back down. But we'll get them open as quick as we can. Again, not in this region, but I use it as an example of the process we go through to hopefully avoid shutting those down in the process we use to get things open back up when we do have to shut down. So long-winded way to say it's case specific and we'll have to see.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Okay, the next one's for me. What is your understanding of the Sentinel role of the professional whale watching community? And what is your position on the value of this role in alerting the maritime community to the presence of whales? Well, I think, I think the Sentinel role, and for folks who don't know what that's in reference to, I believe what the individual's asking is it's in reference to having a commercial whale watching boat out there watching those southern resident killer whales is often used as, can be thought of as being protection for those whales. We had a science panel as part of our task force recommendations, and the task force, or the science panel tried to determine whether the Sentinel role was a positive one in the monitoring and developing those whale watching rules, commercial whale watching rules. It turned out that there wasn't enough data to make any conclusions either way around that. And so we've kind of gone with a more restrictive rules to protect those southern resident killer whales. But that said, we'd really like to be able to adaptively manage those rules. And as we gain more data and as the rules play out, and we watch how the whale watching community is affecting the whales and or not, then we can adapt those rules to possibly incorporate that into the commercial whale watching licensing program. Okay. Oh, here's one for you, Kelly. So are we going to ramp up hatchery production to 100% capacity now or in the near future?
Well, we're with the caveat, we're in the process of doing that right now. So the trick there is what's capacity. We have capacity that's limited by physical capacity. Do we have the pond space, the water quality, water quantity we need? We also have a permitting capacity. So we have a limited number of fish we can put out. Hatchery fish poses particular genetic risk to the genetics of wild fish. We work very closely with NOAA on that. And so we right now are running pretty close with the additions we had from the legislature last year to 100% of what we're available for. We have a budget request into the legislature this year as well to help us prioritize additional expansion of capacity, so we can look at where are areas that we have minimal needs to increase infrastructure, and do we have the permitting capacity to increase production. So we I want to be careful here. This is really one of our controversial issues. Hatcheries are a great thing and can produce a lot of fish for the killer whales. Also done poorly, it can cause a problem. So we're ramping up to what I will call 100% capacity, and that's the maximum capacity we could put out in a smart way without violating our permits or creating an undue risk to our wild fish. So we're basically at that current capacity with the last investments from the legislature, and we're looking for where that next increment could come from.
Okay. Thank you, Kelly. All right, this one's for me. What is WDFW's plan with and the future of Puget Sound winter blackmouth from marine areas 7, 8.1, 8.2, and 9? And yeah, they've been closed, and we had to close marine areas this year due to the low numbers of constraining stocks, specifically in the Stillaguamish, and we're having to close some of those. But we are seeing increasing in freshwater opportunity for salmon fishing due to those closures. So, you know, in the terminal areas, we're getting some more fish. So hopefully with better natural production, we can get better returns and get those fisheries back open. That's the hope. Okay. How is the WDFW handling the pike in the Columbia River? I think that's one for you, Kelly.
Sure, I'll give it a shot. And we do have some information online there as well. So we definitely have the pike showing up in the northern part of the river, in the lake, basically. We are working annually with our co-managers. We go out and we do netting, both seine and gill netting, trying at a time when the pike are spawning and vulnerable to that type of a technique. So it's an annual operation. We try to get out there at least a couple times a year. It's a joint operation with our co-managers and partners as well. We did miss part of that this year with COVID. It was at the time we needed to be there was right at the peak, and we just didn't have our protocols in place to get out. So we are resuming that, and so we'll continue to do that. This is a scary proposition if those pike get into the lower reaches of the river. So we're working on that hard. It's also part, as I mentioned before, on our aquatic invasive species. There's a budget in there to make sure we can do that rapid response, annual planning, annual removal of those pike. Pretty fascinating around the biology of that, but I'll stop before we dig into that too much.
All right, thank you, Kelly. Okay, looks like the next one's for me. How are the goats doing that were relocated to the Cascades from the Olympic Peninsula? And I just like to say I had the incredibly fortunate experience of being able to participate in that project, at least one bit of it this last summer. Amazing teamwork, National Park Service, U.S. Forest Service, WDFW, a bunch of private citizens. It was really just a great cooperative effort to translocate those goats from the Olympic Peninsula to the Cascades. The goats are doing as expected. They're moving around a lot and they're learning their new terrain. We were able to move a lot of goats over to there. There have been some mortalities, which is expected when you stress animals that way and move them into a new environment. But the ones that have survived appear settled, and since the first year of the relocations, and they seem to be doing well. So we think so far it's been quite the success. It just ended recently. I want to say it ended at the end of October, and then next year, there will be some aerial removals of the goats from the Olympic Peninsula, and then I believe the program will be over. Okay. This one's for you, Kelly. Has the department considered restricting salmon fishing? Why has the department made the decision to kill pinnipeds instead of reducing fishing, considering that people consume more salmon than the pinnipeds?
Well, again, I want to be clear. The removal of pinnipeds is on the Columbia River specifically, and we've created an artificial situation there where we're seeing huge impacts to returning adults. We have restricted fishing extremely, and I'm talking in a statewide element right now. Fishing is low. We go through an exhaustive effort to identify conservation needs before we open those fisheries. And so, yes, we absolutely have considered reducing fishing. We have reduced fishing in many areas, again, looking statewide. And in some areas, it's not necessarily true that humans are consuming more salmon than pinnipeds. The studies in the Puget Sound Chasco paper estimated 6 times more salmon mortalities as a result of pinniped predation than humans and killer whales put together. That's one paper, it's one area, so there's additional work to be done, but we know pinnipeds are, again, one of those major elements that we need to get back into a more balanced situation if we're going to recover salmon.
Okay, next question. What is your response on the lawsuit filed by Fish Northwest on equal sharing of salmon? And that one's for you, Kelly.
We're in the region 4. These questions should be for Brendan, but I'll gladly jump in on this one. So we actually filed our briefing that opposed intervention by Fish Northwest into the USV Washington is the legal element of that. I want to emphasize we share the frustration. We understand folks are frustrated with the limited opportunities that we're getting. We found ourselves in a situation where, just based on the facts and the law, it was not, we didn't feel it was appropriate to have the Fish Northwest intervene in a USV Washington. It really is, Washington is the co-manager with the tribes. We're working hard to make sure we're trying to address the needs of our fishermen, but basically it wasn't just, it's a factual and legal determination on our part. That doesn't mean that we aren't working towards equitable sharing, and we want to continue working with that. There's just so much involved in that. It's how you fish, where you fish. The old days of a 50-50 sharing on the bolt is part of it, but it's overlain by an ESA requirements. We monitor impacts rather than actual fish caught. It's easy to get lost in the details. It's also, I think, I want to make sure people don't feel like I'm trying to skirt the question with those details, but it's not as simple as a straight up 50-50 sharing. We are willing to work with our partners. We continue to do that. I think we had our best north of Falcon last year as far as communication with our stakeholders that we've had, and we'll continue to try to find ways to improve that so that we address that need that we agree is a need. Just did not feel that the court was the right venue for that.
All right, thank you, Kelly. Next one's for me. We have several cross-boundary streams and watersheds in Whatcom County. Does WDFW collaborate with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada and/or British Columbia to manage fish and wildlife? And yes, we do. We do that through the Pacific Salmon Treaty. We also do that through different organizations, the International Grizzly Bear excuse me, IGBC, International Grizzly Bear Company, and we work with them on trying to recover grizzlies. Now, recently, the grizzly bear recovery was put on hold by the federal government, and so that one's kind of on standby, and to see how the court cases that are being generated from that are going to play out. But we do cooperate with Canada on those and manage our stocks of salmon and our wildlife. Okay. Next one is, what is the status of forage fish in the region? So that one would be for me as well. We have our habitat science team and our fish program science folks are out monitoring for forage fish. The cherry point herring stocks, we monitor the herring in numerous bays around the state. The I don't know the latest on the herring stocks, but Cherry Point has not been the greatest in the last few years. It's been lowering. So I can find out those numbers and get back to you. It appears that the surf smelt stocks seem to be doing all right. We seem to have a lot of those, and we're seeing more anchovies in Puget Sound than we had in the past. Okay, and this one's for you, Kelly.
Okay.
I've read some papers that link climate change and changing ocean conditions to smaller sizes in fish, including salmon. Is your department monitoring mass weight in addition to salmon return numbers in this effort to support salmon recovery?
So yes, we are. It's a coast-wide phenomenon, and it's affecting both hatchery and wild fish. We do see smaller fish. I think ocean conditions are certainly part of that. There's a question on really with climate change, with those ocean conditions, what's the right size of runs in order to provide that. So we are monitoring that. We're also managing our hatcheries in a way to try to avoid that. But I really think it's a lot of folks point to hatcheries as a problem, but we're seeing it even on wild runs in Alaska that have little or no hatchery impact on them. So certainly something more global is going on, and I think you're right in that it's ocean conditions and probably at least exacerbated by climate change.
Okay. Looks like the next one is for you as well, Kelly. How much of an impact does blackmouth fishing actually affect the Stillaguamish as far as returning mature Chinook?
Well, it certainly has an impact. Those are the blackmouth. We tend to catch them out there, and as we catch them, we are impacting wild and or conservation fish on the Stillaguamish. The Stillaguamish habitat's in rough shape. The Stillaguamish is a constraining stock every year. We're at the point we have such low returns that every fish in the Stillaguamish counts. Every fish in the Stillaguamish has impacts on our ability to open fisheries throughout the Puget Sound. So basically every fish and every part of a fish matter when it comes to preserving that Stillaguamish run and our ability to continue fishing.
All right, thank you, sir. Okay, next one's for me. Brendan, has the National Park Service considered birth control methods for the remaining mountain goats at Olympic National Park instead of lethal removal? So they are switching, the National Park Service is switching to lethal removal through aerial operations. There'll be two-week aerial operations for late July and early September, and that's in the final Mountain Goat Management Plan, EIS. Both the plan and the EIS were finalized after extensive public review process that went back as far as started back in 2014. So the lethal removal is the plan for the future there. Okay. Here's one for, I guess this is outside my region, so I guess it's for you, Kelly. When might we get to have a crab season in South Puget Sound, south of the Narrows Bridge again?
Boy, I can't give you a direct answer for that. I mean, as soon as we can. We are not seeing recruitment, particularly down in marine areas 13-ish. We just need to see that recruitment there before we can open things up, and we're not exactly sure what's going on there. Trying to provide a respite for those crab to return. I don't have a good answer for you. I know there's better detailed answers than I'm fumbling with right now. So we will make sure if whoever's asking the question gets us that question, I'll get it to our crab folks, Aaron Defoe and others, and get you a more specific answer. But we are closed there now for conservation purposes, and I don't know when we'll be able to reopen it.
Okay, here's a follow-up on one, Kelly. It said you mentioned conservation fish. Could you explain what these are?
Yeah, so so our hatcheries produce fish for a number of reasons. Some are like a mitigation fish. They're mitigation hatcheries. They produce fish for harvest. Other places like Stillaguamish or elsewhere, we're down to such a low wild stock that we have to help those stock with hatchery implementation as well. So in some areas we're running the hatchery, we use that natural origin brood stock, we're putting them back out in the river, we're trying to rebuild a naturally spawning group. So that's what I meant by conservation fish. Some of the fish being raised in the Stille are really being put back so that they can hopefully return as natural origin spawners and help bolster that population.
Okay. Here's one. Could you explain what winter blackmouth are? And I guess that one's for me. Winter blackmouth are a residualized Chinook, but they're using Puget Sound as their ocean. So they actually remain in Puget Sound, and they are released at a later age. And then we fish on them in the winters and have been in the last few years. We haven't had a fishery for them. So they basically don't go out to sea. But blackmouth is the name for the other name for Chinook, and they've just kind of gotten that moniker. Okay, for Kelly, here's one more for you. Is the commercial herring roe fisheries in Canada affecting Washington origin salmon stocks?
Well, I'm gonna have to punt on this one a little bit. I will say that the salmon stocks are managed through the Pacific Salmon Treaty as a whole, and anything you do for forage fish or for salmon affect our fish too. Most of our salmon head out to sea and take a right and head up into Canada and Alaska, so they're feeding on those. As far as specific impacts or quantifying that impact, I would have to defer to someone in our fish program. We can get you an answer with more detail. I apologize for the fumbling again with this question. The answer to me would be yes, they do, but I think that's managed through the Pacific treaties to make sure that they're at a level that we can sustain. I will say that we're cutting back on fisheries throughout the coast, Alaska through California, in fact, but for our fish, Alaska to here, and it's a cooperative effort between our states, Canada and Alaska.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question, and I can take this one. Members of both the SRKW J-Pod and K-Pod have been in southern Puget Sound for the last 2 days. What fall salmon stocks through Puget Sound are currently running that might be bringing the whales in? And those are the Chum. The Chum salmon is one of these late running stocks. They run through November and can run even into December. So that's what they're probably feeding on the most right now. Okay, looks like we're not getting a whole lot of more questions in, so maybe we can take a few more and start wrapping this up. We're getting close to our time here. Here's one more. For you, Kelly, when is the determination made to abandon a genetic marked Chinook stock and brood stock? A genetic marked Chinook stock and brood stock with another genetic marker that may be doing well? That's a pretty technical question for you, Kelly.
That's a pretty technical question, but I'll take a shot at it, and the answer is going to be it's case specific. So one area I know we're working on that again, is in the Mid-Hood Canal area, where we've got a Chinook return there that we think is probably not the right stock for that area. We're working with NOAA and our tribal partners to figure out, is there a better stock for that? Where could we do that? We would generate those through a conservation program like I described earlier. Beyond that, I don't know of us considering changing stocks elsewhere in Puget Sound right now, but again, we can follow up with more detail.
Thank you, Kelly. It looks like the last one's for me. I'm not seeing any more questions in the queue, and it's any updates on the Cedar River Sockeye hatchery operations. And this year has been just a horrible run, unfortunately, for Cedar River Sockeye. I think it's the lowest ever. I think we only got back about 1,900 fish, and that used to be a peak run of about 300,000 fish. So it's really on the decline. There's a whole host of issues we're looking at to try and determine how to help save that Cedar River Sockeye hatchery run, but it is not looking good for them. So we're working hard with the with the utility and the hatchery owner, Seattle Public Utilities, and they're very concerned about it as well. So we're doing our best to try and get that stock back on its feet. We're hoping we can get some increased numbers back because ocean conditions have improved. Sockeye take a few years to turn around and get back, so we're really hoping that we get more fish back next year, and we're working on some pinniped test or experimental noise producing devices that we can deter sockeye, or excuse me, the pinnipeds, the seals, the harbor seals, and the sea lions at the locks from preying on so many of the returning adults and the out-migrating juveniles. So we're hoping that'll have an effect as well. Hopefully that answered the question. And it looks like I'm not seeing any more questions in the queue. Oh, one more. Okay, last one. For you, Kelly, if blackmouth are a strictly hatchery-generated fish, why are they included in the bolt decision or treaty rules? It's a good question.
Well, there's a couple elements here. Blackmouth and Chinook are one and the same. Blackmouth are just a yearling type, which occurs naturally as well. Treaty fish are treaty fish. Basically, we have hatcheries that produce fish as a matter of mitigation for treaties. So the fact that it's a hatchery production doesn't make it a non-treaty fish or a fish to share with. Also, one of the things I talked about earlier with our ESA overlaps is incidental mortality. So as you're catching one fish, you're catching other fish as well. Even if it's a hook and release type time, we have some mortality when we're in these tough times on places like the Stilly, where every fish counts. We have to count that as well. So it's kind of a mixed bag there. There's lots of reasons, but they're certainly in the mix in how we manage salmon as a whole in Puget Sound, and that's driven primarily through our constraining stocks.
Okay, and it looks like we have one last question that we can wrap this up with, and it'd be for me. So, and that's what I said last time. I thought we were done, but they keep trickling in. So it says, since you mentioned Cedar River sockeye, how are the chum runs doing? The chum runs are not doing well. They are at historic lows, especially in the North Puget Sound. So we're really concerned about that, and we are trying some new brood stocking efforts. We're going to be doing some work with some of the tribes to try and help improve the runs and get that production up. But chum runs are not looking this strong this year, unfortunately. Okay, well, I think that all done with the questions. All right. So thank you so much for participating. Those are great questions. Really appreciate it. And it was really great to be able to spend some time. It's just good for us to be able to connect with you, hear your concerns, hear what questions you have. And you know, even if it's not in person, I prefer being in a meeting room with people. The video virtual meeting is not my favorite or specialty by any means. So I can't wait till we get back to meetings in person. That's kind of who I am. I'm more of a person-to-person person. So I'd like to just say thanks again, really appreciate it. And everyone have a good evening. And I'd like to let Kelly have the last word of the evening. So thanks again. And Kelly, any last words?
Well, I'll first echo your thoughts on it. Sure look forward to getting back to in-person meetings with folks, and then we will definitely do that when we can. But I do want to thank everybody for joining us tonight, even if it is just in the virtual world. We need to take every opportunity we can to hear from you and connect with you directly. I'll also remind folks that if you had a question we didn't get to, or you thought of a question afterwards, send us an email. One option is to send it to director@dfw.wa.gov, director@dfw.wa.gov, and we'll see that we get an answer back to you. Again, thank you for your time. Hopefully this was useful for you this evening, and stay home, stay healthy, and enjoy your evening. Thank you.
Thank you.